A wounded Orc Chieftain's daughter appeared in a man's backyard, and he chose to help her anyway. Walt had seen thieves, drunkards, and desperate men climb the fence behind his crumbling house before, but never an Orc woman wearing the torn war cloak of a chieftain's bloodline. She did not fall into his backyard like prey. She landed like someone who had crawled through death just to reach that exact patch of earth. One hand clutched her side. The other held a broken iron seal stained with blood. Before Walt could shout, she raised a dagger at him with shaking strength and said, "If you call anyone, they will bury you where you stand." Then torchlight flickered beyond the far fence. Riders were already searching the road. Walt should have run. Instead, he noticed what made his blood turn cold. The symbol carved into the broken seal matched the old stone buried beneath his own backyard. A secret his dead father had warned him never to touch. Walt stood frozen in the wet grass, staring at the Orc woman crouched beside his broken fence, like a storm that had crawled into human shape. She was larger than any woman he had ever seen, broad-shouldered and strong even now, with dark green skin slick with rain, black hair stuck to her face, and a pair of lower tusks catching the faint moonlight whenever she breathed through the pain. Blood ran from beneath the torn leather at her ribs, but her grip on the dagger never weakened. Her eyes stayed on him with the hard, cold focus of someone who had already killed to stay alive. Beyond the fence, torchlight moved through the dark fields. Walt lifted both hands slowly. He was no fighter, no hero, just a poor man with splintered porch steps, a dead vegetable patch, and a backyard full of things he kept meaning to fix. His father had left him this house, this patch of land, and one warning he had never explained. Properly, if anyone ever comes asking about the old stone, say you know nothing. Walt had been a boy when he heard it. He had never forgotten. Now the wounded Orc in front of him held a broken iron seal in one bloodied hand, and the mark pressed into that seal was the same hooked symbol carved into the half-buried stone near. His fig tree. "You came here on purpose," Walt said quietly. The Orc woman said nothing at first. Rain slid down the sharp line of her cheek. Then she gave the smallest nod, as if even that much truth cost her. The riders beyond the fence were getting closer. Walt could hear horses breathing, boots in mud, men speaking in low, urgent voices. This was no random hunt. They were searching this area with intent. "Who are they?" he asked. Jesse's voice came out rough but steady. "Men who want me dead. Orcs too." That answer chilled him more than if she had named one enemy. It meant betrayal. It meant something larger than blood and pursuit. It meant whatever had driven her into his yard was not a simple border clash, but something planned. One of the torchlights stopped near the back road. Walt looked from the moving fire to Jesse, then to the old stone half hidden beneath weeds and soaked earth. He suddenly understood that the danger in his yard had not begun tonight. It had been buried there long before she arrived. Jessie swayed where she crouched, her breath turning shallow for a moment, but her dagger remained raised. "I didn't come for help," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I came for what lies under your ground." And in that moment, Walt realized letting her stay might ruin his life, but letting the men outside find her might ruin far more than his. Walt should have forced her to leave. Every instinct told him to step back, open the gate, and let whatever storm was chasing her pass through without touching him. But the moment he looked again at the torchlight moving beyond the fence, he understood that choice was already gone. Men were searching too carefully, too quietly. They were not village guards looking for a stray thief. They were hunting with purpose. He moved first, not toward Jessie, but toward the fig tree. "Can you stand?" he asked. Jessie narrowed her eyes, suspicious even through pain. Long enough. That was all he needed. Walt dropped to one knee beside the patch of soaked earth where the old stone lay half-buried under roots and moss. His father had forbidden him to touch it, but tonight that warning felt less like protection and more like a lock somebody else had placed on his life. He dug his fingers into the mud, ignoring the cold, until he found the edge of the carved slab. Jessie limped closer, one hand pressed hard to her wound, the other still holding the dagger low at her side. The symbol cut into the stone matched the broken seal exactly. "Move," she said. Her voice had the tone of command, not request. Even half falling, she still sounded like someone born above other people. Walt almost refused on principle, but then voices drifted closer from beyond the fence, and urgency swallowed pride. Together, awkwardly, they dragged the stone aside. Beneath it was not treasure nor weapons, but a narrow hollow wrapped in rotting cloth and sealed in wax. Jessie stared at it as if she had crossed half the world to reach that one hidden bundle. Before she could grab it, a shout rose from the far side of the yard. Walt reacted instantly. He pulled the bundle free, shoved the stone back crookedly into place, and caught Jessie by the arm before she collapsed. She twisted sharply, ready to strike, but he hissed, "Fight me later." He led her not into the house, but into the old rain barrel shed behind the chicken coop, barely standing and hidden under climbing vines. It smelled of damp wood and rust. Jessie hated the weakness of leaning on him, and Walt hated how easily her blood was soaking into his sleeve. Still, he got her inside seconds before two riders appeared beyond the fence line. They did not enter. They only searched with torchlight, scanning mud, broken branches and footprints. Inside the shed, Jessie held the recovered bundle against her chest like something more valuable than her own life. Walt looked at her, breathing hard in the darkness. "Now tell me the truth," he whispered. Jessie lifted her eyes to his, cold, exhausted, and full of something deeper than fear. "What lies in this bundle," she said, "is the reason my own people tried to kill me." The riders remained outside only a few moments, but to Walt, each second dragged like a blade across bone. Torchlight leaked through the cracks of the old shed, sliding over Jessie's face, over the blood on her hand, over the bundle she held. So tightly it looked as if she would die before surrendering it. When the hoofbeats finally moved off, the silence that followed felt even more dangerous. Walt let out a slow breath. "You said your own people want you dead." Jessie did not answer at once. She knelt carefully against the wall, fighting the pain in her side, and began unwrapping the damp cloth bundle with stiff fingers. Inside was a thin bronze tablet, no larger than a hand, etched with old markings Walt could not fully read. At its center was the same hook symbol from the broken seal, but beside it was another crest too. One Walt recognized from tax papers and town notices, the mark of Lord Harlan, the human border lord. His stomach tightened. "Why would an orc seal be hidden with a human lord's crest under my yard?" Jessie's expression darkened. "Because this ground was once used for secret meetings, long before your village spread this far, before the border hardened, before men and orcs taught their children to hate properly." Walt stared at the tablet. His father had known. All those years of warnings, all those silences, all those nights he drank too much and stared out at the yard without explanation. He had known something had been buried there. Jessie leaned, her head back against the wood for a moment, then forced herself upright again. Even wounded, she refused to look broken for long. "My father was not the first chieftain to deal with humans. There were trade pacts, private oaths, exchanges. No one on either side wanted spoken aloud. This tablet records one of them. Names, dates, witness marks." Walt looked at her sharply. "Then why bury it? Because someone wanted the truth dead." Her voice stayed low, but rage burned beneath it now. She explained in fragments, each one more unsettling than the last. She had not been attacked by raiders or enemy hunters. She had been ambushed while carrying word that her father meant to expose certain border dealings inside the clan. Someone close to power learned of it. The escort around her had been compromised. One warrior turned on another. By the time Jessie escaped, she knew only one thing for certain. The betrayal was not just orc against orc. A human hand was inside it too. "And you came here because of this tablet," Walt said. "Yes," she said. "I was told that if I lived long enough to reach the old yard with the fig tree, the buried proof would still be there." Walt felt a chill race through him. "Who told you?" For the first time, Jessie hesitated. "A dying man," she said at last. "One who served my house for 20 years. Walt was not sure whether she was protecting someone or simply too tired to explain more. Before he could press further, voices sounded again in the distance, not from the road this time, but from the lower fields. More searchers. The net was tightening. Jessie tried to rise too quickly, and pain cut through her balance. Walt caught her by instinct. For one brief second, they froze, her hand clenched against his arm, strong even in weakness. Her eyes met his, hard and unreadable, but no longer as cold as before. She pulled away first. "We cannot stay," she said. "No," Walt replied, looking down at the tablet. "We can't." He glanced toward the cracks in the wall, toward the dark yard outside, toward the buried life his father had left him. By helping her, he was no longer hiding from danger. He was inside it now. And whatever secret had been planted beneath his backyard years ago had finally come back to claim both of them. Walt and Jessie left the shed under the cover of thinning rain, moving through the back edge of the yard where the fence had long ago fallen into the weeds. The fields beyond were black and slick, the kind of darkness that made every tree look like a watcher. Walt led her toward the abandoned irrigation trench that cut behind the village road, the bronze tablet wrapped under his coat. He did not trust himself to carry a sword, but he trusted his memory of the land. Every ditch, every stone wall, every half-rotten gate from his childhood now mattered more than strength. Jessie followed with grim determination, one hand pressed to her wound, the other gripping her dagger. She moved like a warrior trapped in a body that had begun to betray her. More than once Walt heard her breathing roughen, but she never asked him to slow. They nearly reached the trench when voices erupted ahead. Not villagers. Armed men. Walt pulled. Jessie down behind a crumbling wall, just as torchlight swept across the wet grass. From the words drifting toward them, he caught enough to understand the shape of the trap. These were Lord Harlan's riders, but one of the men spoke of an orc claimant, and of payment already promised from the other side. Jessie's jaw tightened. She understood at once what Walt had only begun to suspect. "This was never about silencing one witness," she whispered. "They mean to start a war." A boot scraped close. One rider separated from the others to check the wall. Jessie tensed to strike, but Walt moved first. He threw a loose stone into the trench below. The sound cracked sharply through the dark. The rider spun and shouted to the others, and in that instant Jessie lunged from hiding and slammed him to the mud before he could raise alarm properly. Her blade stopped at his throat. Under threat, the man confessed enough to break whatever hope remained. Harlan had arranged secret dealings with an orc faction inside Jessie's own bloodline. If Jessie died near human land, blame would fall cleanly, across the border. Her father would answer with rage, Harlan would answer with soldiers, and men like him would rise through the ashes. Jessie's face changed as she listened, not with fear. With betrayal so deep it looked almost hollow. When the rider spat that her death had only been delayed, Jessie nearly killed him on the spot. Walt caught her wrist. She turned on him with fury blazing in her eyes, and for the first time since she fell into his yard, he saw not the wounded fugitive, but the chieftain's daughter in full. Proud, dangerous, and one heartbeat from becoming exactly what her enemies wanted. Jessie's arm trembled under Walt's grip, not from weakness now, but from fury so sharp it seemed to cut the rain itself. The captured rider knelt in the mud before them, breathing hard, his face pale under the torch glow spilling from the others farther off in the field. One quick movement from Jesse and his throat would open. Walt saw in her eyes that part of her, wanted exactly that, not because she was cruel, but because grief, betrayal, and pain had finally found a single living shape to strike. "If you kill him now," Walt said quietly, "he dies a liar, and they still win." For a heartbeat, he thought she might turn the blade on him instead. Her tusks showed slightly as her jaw tightened, and rain ran down her face like war paint. Then, slowly, she pulled the dagger back. Not out of mercy, but out of discipline. The rider collapsed forward, coughing in panic. Jesse rose unsteadily and looked toward the distant fires beyond the field. "Then we stopped them properly. They forced the rider to lead them to the old boundary shrine at the ridge above the road, a forgotten place where humans and orcs had once sworn trade oaths before fear became stronger than memory. The shrine stood half-broken beneath leaning, stones and thorn vines, its carved pillars cracked by time, its altar blackened by old weather. Jesse knew at once that someone had been there recently. Boot marks, disturbed ash, a horse tether line, a concealed satchel beneath one fallen slab. Inside the satchel were letters sealed with Lord Harlan's mark, along with a second seal from an orc warrior house tied by blood to Jesse's clan. Payments, route times, orders. One letter spoke openly of her death, as if it were already done. Another mentioned preparing both sides for retaliation once her body was found or blamed on humans. Walt felt sick reading it. Men with titles had already priced the lives of villagers, soldiers, and entire clans. Jesse read in silence, and the silence was worse than shouting. Then she found the last piece, a narrow strip of leather marked with her father's private sign, proof that someone inside her own household had passed movements and meeting routes to the conspirators. That struck deeper than the wound in her side. For the first time, Walt saw her confidence break. She stood rigid at the ruined altar, breathing hard, holding the evidence with blood-stained fingers as if it might burn through her hand. "It reaches into my father's hall," she said, her voice low and hollow. "Into my blood." Walt stepped closer but did not touch her immediately. "Then now you know," she laughed once, bitter and empty. "Know what? That my people were ready to use my death, that humans were waiting to profit from it, that everything noble is only a prettier name for hunger." Her eyes lifted to him, fierce and wounded all at once. "I should go back now. I should put a blade through every smiling face before they speak another lie, and walk in alone, half-healed, with anger instead of a plan," Walt said. "That is what they want." She looked at him as though she hated that he was right. Thunder rolled far off over the hills. The rider on his knees in the wet grass shifted, perhaps thinking chaos might yet save him. Jesse turned and drove her dagger into the ground beside his throat, pinning him in place without cutting skin. It was not mercy. It was control. "We take this to the clan fire," she said at last. "Publicly, before witnesses." Walt nodded, though the choice tightened fear through his chest. "Then I go with you." Jesse stared at him. "Do you understand what that means? You are human, poor, unknown. In my father's hall, men like you are not honored guests. In yours, women like me are monsters in stories. If you walk beside me now, you lose the safety of belonging anywhere." Walt let out a breath that almost sounded like a tired laugh. "I never had much of that to begin with." For the first time since he had seen her in his yard, something in Jesse's face softened without surrendering its strength. Not gratitude, something deeper. Recognition. Before either could speak again, shouts rose below the ridge. The missing rider had been noticed, torches were climbing the path. Jessie moved instantly, pain or no pain. She gathered the letters, the seals, the leather strip, every piece of proof. Walt hauled the captured rider up by the collar and dragged him toward the rear descent of the shrine, where the old stone steps curved toward the forest pass. Men were already appearing at the lower entrance, steel flashing in the firelight. One of Harlan's captains shouted for surrender. Jessie turned on the top step, tall even in exhaustion, cloak whipping in the wind. Her silhouette against the storm-dark sky looked less like prey now, and more like judgment. "I am Jessie, daughter of Chieftain Blood," she called down, voice carrying across stone and rain. "Tell your master he failed!" Arrows flew. Walt threw himself sideways, dragging the prisoner down as shafts struck the pillar behind them. Jessie met the next rush with a speed that seemed impossible for someone wounded. She fought not wildly, but with brutal precision, buying seconds instead of glory. Walt did what he could, kicking loose stones down the steps, shoving a broken shrine post into the path, pulling the prisoner between himself and the nearest blade when necessary. It was ugly, desperate survival, but it worked. They escaped through the rear pass into the black pines beyond the shrine, with the evidence still in hand and their enemies shouting behind them. By dawn, soaked, hunted, and beyond the old ridge, Walt and Jessie stopped at the first rise overlooking Orc territory. Below, in the far distance, smoke from the clan stronghold curled into the pale morning sky. Jessie looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned to Walt. "If we go there," she said, "everything changes." Walt looked back toward the human lands behind them, then at the road ahead, and finally at her bloodied hand still wrapped around the proof that could stop a war or start one. "Then let it," he said, and together, with enemies on both sides and no easy path left, they walked toward the place where truth would cost them everything. By the time Walt and Jessie reached the outer ridge of her clan's territory, dawn had already bled across the sky in pale silver, cold and merciless. The stronghold ahead rose from the mountain like something carved by will rather than stone, all black timber, iron-bound gates, and long banners stirring in the morning wind. It did not look like a place that welcomed weakness, doubt, or outsiders. It looked like a place that remembered every insult and repaid each one in full. Walt felt that truth the moment the first watchman saw him beside her. Orc warriors descended before they reached the lower path, armored and silent, their weapons ready, their eyes full of disbelief and suspicion. Jessie straightened, despite the pain she could no longer fully hide. Blood had dried dark along her side, and exhaustion had hollowed her face, but the force in her posture changed everything. The hunted woman from Walt's backyard vanished. In her place stood someone born to command. She spoke in her own tongue first, sharp and formal, and the warriors stopped short as if struck. One dropped to a knee, another stared openly at the blood on her, and then at the human standing beside her. Shock spread through their ranks. Then unease. They had prepared funeral fire for a daughter of the clan. Instead, she had returned carrying storm, evidence, and scandal. They escorted them inside. The great hall was already awake. Word of her return traveled faster than footsteps. Elders, captains, servants, rivals, and kin gathered like wolves around a wound. Walt felt every eye on him. Some looked with disgust, some with curiosity, some with the thin, cold calculation of people already deciding how his existence could be used. He understood in that instant that Jessie had not exaggerated. Walking beside her had already cost him something. The human world behind him was no longer fully his, but this place would never truly be either. At the far end of the hall, seated, beneath carved horns and ancestral iron, Jessie's father rose from his high chair. Age had touched him, but not gently enough to make him harmless. He looked like a man built from old battles and held together by pride alone. When he saw Jessie alive, something flickered across his face, too deep and private to name. Relief, perhaps, grief, fury. Then it was gone beneath authority. Jessie did not kneel, Neither did he ask her to. What followed was not welcome, not reunion, and not peace. It was reckoning. Before the clan fire, in full hearing of council and household, Jesse laid out the truth piece by piece. The black-fletched arrow, the compromised escort, Lord Harlan's letters, the hidden oath tablet from the yard with the fig tree, the seal of the warrior house tied to her bloodline, the proof that her death had been prepared as tinder for a greater blaze. Every word drove another crack through the room. The accused did what desperate, powerful people always did. They denied, they questioned, they twisted. They called the evidence planted, the letters forged, the human witness contaminated by greed, or lust, or fear. One elder openly asked why a chieftain's daughter had returned under the protection of a poor human man, unless shame had already clouded her judgment. A warrior lord implied she had been weakened, not by injury, but by dependence. Walt said nothing at first. He knew this was her ground, her fire, her world. But then one of the conspirators, a kinsman who had smiled too easily since their arrival, demanded that Walt be dragged forward in chains and examined like a liar bought with copper. Murmurs rose in agreement. Jesse's face went still. "He stands under my word," she said. The kinsman sneered. "And what has your word purchased lately but disgrace?" The hall changed after that, not loudly, not all at once. But Walt felt it, the way air changes before lightning strikes. Jessie stepped closer to the clan fire, her shadow cutting long behind her. "You call it disgrace," she said, her voice low and carrying, "that a human man showed more honor. To me, bleeding in the dark than my own blood did beneath a clear sky. You call it disgrace that he did not trade my life for favor, did not sell my name for coin, did not kneel to fear when men armed by both sides hunted us like animals." Her gaze swept the room. "Then learn this well. If that is disgrace, your idea of honor is already dead." Silence held the hall. For the first time since entering the stronghold, Walt saw some of the watching faces shift, not into affection, but into something more serious. Uneasy respect, the kind that does not come from charm, only from surviving. Judgment without lowering your eyes. That was when the final lie broke. The captured rider, dragged in under guard and already half terrified out of loyalty, named Lord Harlan openly. He named payment routes, meeting times. He named the kinsman who had supplied Jesse's path and escort changes. And when he spoke, another voice rose from the hall itself, one of Jesse's father's oldest captains, wounded and pale, but alive. He had not died at the shrine after all. He had escaped, hidden, and now stepped forward with the last missing proof. The conspiracy collapsed under the weight of its own greed. Steel flashed. One traitor lunged for Jesse's father in a final act of desperate violence. Jesse moved first, wounded body and all, intercepting the strike with a force that drove both of them into the base of the fire dais. Walt did not think. He grabbed the fallen iron stand beside the council fire and swung it hard into the attacker's arm before the second blade could fall. It was clumsy, ugly, nothing like heroism sung in halls. But it was enough. Guards closed in. Blood hit stone. The moment ended. When the smoke of it cleared, the kinsman lay bound, the rider broken by fear, and the hall that had greeted Jessie with suspicion now faced a harder truth than her survival. Their danger had not come from outside first. It had come from within. Lord Harlan's name spread quickly beyond the stronghold. Human messengers were intercepted, letters were sent, witnesses were secured. The war that had been carefully prepared did not vanish, but it stumbled. Without Jesse's death, without the clean lie both sides were meant to inherit, the machinery of vengeance lost its perfect excuse. Border captains hesitated. Trade roads did not close. Villages braced for blood and got a tense, uncertain pause. Instead, it was not a miracle, it was something rarer. A disaster interrupted. Jesse's father lived, but the betrayal changed him. So did the sight of his daughter returning from death beside the very kind of man his people had long dismissed as lesser. In the weeks that followed, he withdrew from daily command more than anyone expected. Jessie was forced into power sooner than she had ever wanted. She took her place not as a girl reclaimed by her clan, but as a woman who had seen exactly how. Easily power rotted when honor became performance, and Walt did not go back unchanged, because there was no path left for that. When he returned to the human side under guarded truce, his village no longer looked at him the same way. Some stepped aside as if he carried danger in his shadow. Some whispered that he had betrayed his kind. Others, quieter and fewer, looked at him as if he had crossed into a larger world and brought back proof that their fear had never told them the whole truth. Lord Harlan's disgrace reached even there. Officials shifted. Men who had spoken loudly about safety learned caution. But none of it restored Walt to the small, invisible life he had once endured. His cottage still stood. The porch still leaned. The fig tree still clawed toward the sky. But the yard behind it, the yard where Jessie had fallen bleeding into his life, was no longer only a piece of land. Beneath it had slept a truth larger than either of them. Now that truth had been awakened, and with it so had he. Their love cost them both. For Jessie it cost simplicity. She could no longer belong entirely to the old pride of her people. Too many had heard her defend a human before the fire. Too many had seen that she valued not blood purity or status, but the character of a man who had every reason to turn away, and did not. Some followed her more fiercely because of it. Others would never forgive it. Rule, when it came nearer, would never be easy for her now. It would always be shadowed by whispers that the daughter of the clan had let a human reshape her heart. For Walt, it cost safety. He would never again be just another poor man mending fences for coins. He had become witness to the kind of truth powerful people kill to bury. He had stood in an Orc stronghold and lived. He had chosen someone the world had taught him to fear, and in doing so, stepped outside the narrow boundaries that once defined his life. There was loneliness in that. There was risk. There was no way back to being small in the old comfortable way, but what they gained was greater than comfort. The old boundary shrine was rebuilt first. Not grandly, not all at once, but stone by stone, with witnesses from both sides. Jessie ordered it. Walt helped design the repairs because he understood weather, earth, and what should endure if built honestly. Trade talks began there under guard and suspicion, then under law. Not peace exactly, not yet, but a place where lies had less room to breathe, a place where memory had been restored instead of hidden.